Rain crashed against the windows of St. Mary Medical Center. Inside room 214, 12-year-old Lily Harper lay motionless on a hospital bed. Her small fingers barely moved. Dark circles covered her pale face. Machines beeped steadily around her. Doctors had spent 3 exhausting weeks trying to save her. Blood tests, brain scans, neurological exams, experimental medications. Nothing worked. Every single day, Lily became weaker. And every single day, her mother, Emily, felt her world collapsing. Emily sat beside the bed, holding Lily's hand tightly. She hadn't slept properly in days. Her coffee sat cold beside her untouched. Lily looked at her mother weakly. "Mom." Emily forced a smile instantly. "Yes, sweetheart." "Why can't I feel my legs properly anymore?" The question shattered Emily inside. But she refused to cry in front of her daughter. "You're going to get better." Lily looked uncertain. Doctors kept entering the room with serious faces, whispering, checking charts, avoiding eye contact. Emily noticed everything. Finally, late that evening, 3 specialists entered together. That terrified her immediately. One doctor closed the door quietly. Another sat across from Emily. The oldest doctor removed his glasses slowly. "We need to talk." Emily's heart sank. "What happened?" The doctor exhaled carefully. "We've ruled out infections, tumors, autoimmune disease, and genetic disorders." Emily stared blankly. "So what does she have?" Silence. Then the doctor spoke words Emily would never forget. "We don't know." The room became unbearably quiet. Emily blinked repeatedly. "What do you mean you don't know?" "We've never seen symptoms progress like this without a detectable cause." Emily's breathing became shaky. "But your doctors were still trying." "But she's getting worse." Nobody answered because they knew she was right. Lily's hands trembled weakly beneath the blanket. Her muscles were slowly failing, and nobody understood why. The youngest doctor finally spoke softly. "There's a possibility the damage could become permanent." Emily froze. "No, we have to prepare for every outcome." "No." Her voice echoed through the room. Nurses outside turned their heads. Emily stood suddenly. "You're telling me my daughter is dying and you don't even know why." The doctors remained silent. That silence said everything. Lily started crying quietly in bed. "Mom." Emily rushed over instantly and hugged her daughter tightly. "It's okay. I'm here." But inside, Emily was terrified, completely terrified. Hours later, the doctors left. The hospital lights dimmed for the night. Rain still hammered the city outside. Emily sat alone beside Lily while the machines beeped endlessly. Then something strange happened. Lily's phone vibrated on the bedside table. At the exact same moment, the heart monitor flickered briefly. Emily frowned. A tiny disturbance crossed the screen. Then everything returned to normal. Emily stared at the monitor carefully. Maybe coincidence. She looked away. Then Lily plugged her charger into the wall outlet beside the bed. Again, the monitor flickered sharply. Emily's eyes widened. "What was that?" Lily looked confused. "What?" Emily slowly unplugged the charger. The monitor stabilized immediately. Her heart started pounding. A nurse entered moments later. Emily pointed at the machine. "It keeps flickering when electronics are plugged in." The nurse glanced briefly. "That happens sometimes." Then she walked away casually. But Emily couldn't stop thinking about it, because suddenly she remembered something strange. Weeks earlier, before Lily collapsed completely, she often complained about dizziness near electronics at home. The microwave, the television, even her bedroom lamp sometimes. At the time, Emily assumed it was stress. Now she wasn't so sure. The next morning, Lily could barely lift her arms. Doctors increased medication again. Emily watched helplessly. Then one specialist quietly pulled her aside. "You should prepare yourself emotionally." Emily felt cold instantly. "No, we're doing everything possible." "No, she may not recover." Emily stepped backward slowly. Tears filled her eyes. Then anger replaced them. "You're giving up." "That's not true." "Yes, it is." She stormed out of the hospital room before anyone could stop her. Downstairs, the hospital lobby buzzed with activity. Phones ringing, People talking. Stretchers moving quickly through hallways. Emily walked outside into the cold rain, trying to breathe. That's when she noticed an ambulance parked near the maintenance garage. A mechanic lay beneath it repairing something. Sparks flashed beneath the vehicle. The hospital driver complained loudly nearby. Electrical system keeps failing every few hours. The mechanic slid out slowly from under the ambulance. Tall, broad shoulders, grease on his hands. Calm eyes. What kind of failure? He asked. Dashboard glitches, random shutdowns, radio interference. The mechanic nodded thoughtfully. Sounds like a grounding problem. Emily froze instantly. Grounding problem. Interference. Those words hit her hard, because suddenly something deep inside her whispered that the doctors were missing something important. And somehow, this mechanic might be the first person who could actually help. Rainwater dripped from the edge of the hospital roof. The mechanic stood beside the ambulance, wiping grease from his hands with an old cloth. Emily hesitated for a moment. Then she walked toward him. "Excuse me." The mechanic looked up calmly. "Yes, ma'am." Up close. He looked older than she first thought. Maybe mid-30s. Tired eyes. Oil stains on his jacket. A name patch stitched across his chest read, "Daniel." Emily glanced nervously toward the hospital entrance. This is going to sound strange. Daniel leaned against the ambulance patiently. "I've heard stranger." Emily explained Lily's illness quickly. The weakness, the headaches, the dizziness near electronics, the flickering monitor upstairs. Daniel listened without interrupting once. That surprised Emily. Most doctors cut her off after 2 sentences. But Daniel stayed completely focused. When she finished, he frowned slightly. "How old is your house?" Emily blinked. "What?" "Your house. Is it old?" "Built in the 70s. Daniel nodded slowly. "Any recent electrical repairs?" Emily thought for a second. "A contractor replaced wiring in the basement last year." Daniel's expression changed immediately. "Cheap contractor?" Emily looked surprised. "How did you know?" "Because bad electrical grounding causes weird problems people ignore." Emily crossed her arms nervously. "You really think electricity could hurt someone?" Daniel glanced toward the ambulance dashboard. "You'd be amazed what unstable current can do." Emily stared at him silently. Daniel opened a toolbox and pulled out a small testing device. This ambulance had random electrical interference for weeks. Everyone thought the electronics were defective. What was wrong with it? One damaged grounding wire. Emily's heartbeat quickened. Daniel continued calmly. "When electrical systems aren't grounded properly, stray voltage spreads into places it shouldn't." Emily swallowed hard. "And that can affect people? In extreme cases?" "Absolutely." Emily looked back toward the hospital windows upstairs. Hope started rising inside her again. Tiny, dangerous, but real. Daniel noticed the desperation in her face. He lowered his voice. "I'm not saying this is definitely your daughter's problem. But the symptoms are strange." Emily's eyes filled with emotion instantly. For weeks, nobody has even considered another possibility. Daniel remained quiet for a moment. Then he asked softly, "Did her symptoms get worse at home?" Emily thought carefully. "Yes." "What about outside the house?" She always felt slightly better outdoors. Daniel looked thoughtful now. Very thoughtful. "What room does she spend most time in?" "Her bedroom." "Near lots of electronics?" Emily nodded slowly. Daniel stared at the rain-covered pavement silently. Then he made a decision. "I'll come check your house." Emily looked shocked. "You would do that?" Daniel shrugged casually. "Can't promise anything. That's more than anyone else has done." Daniel packed his tools into the truck. "Meet me there after visiting hours." For the first time in weeks, Emily felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Real hope. That evening, Emily returned home briefly before Daniel arrived. The house felt unusually quiet without Lily. Every hallway reminded her of happier times. Birthday decorations still hung faintly in the dining room from 2 months earlier, before everything changed. Emily entered Lily's bedroom slowly. Stuffed animals sat neatly on shelves. School books remained open on the desk, exactly where Lily left them. And then Emily noticed something strange. A faint buzzing sound. Very soft. Almost impossible to hear. She walked closer to the wall beside Lily's bed. The buzzing became slightly louder. Emily frowned. A cold feeling crawled through her chest. Then headlights appeared outside. Daniel had arrived. He stepped inside, carrying a metal toolbox and flashlight. The moment he entered the hallway, he stopped walking. "You hear that?" Emily stared at him. "You hear it too?" Daniel nodded slowly. "That's electrical hum." He moved carefully through the house like a detective studying a crime scene. Every few seconds, he paused to listen. Finally, he reached Lily's bedroom. The buzzing sound was strongest there. Daniel crouched beside the outlet near Lily's bed and pulled out the small tester device. The moment he activated it, beep! The device flashed bright red instantly. Daniel's face hardened. "That's not good." Emily felt her stomach tighten. "What does that mean?" Daniel tested another outlet, then another. The beeping became louder each time. His expression grew more serious. "How long has Lily slept in this room?" "All her life." Daniel stood slowly. "We need to check the breaker panel." They walked downstairs into the basement. The air smelled damp and dusty. Daniel opened the electrical panel carefully. The second he saw the wiring, he cursed under his breath. Burned wires, improper connections, missing grounding clamps, dangerously unstable repairs. Emily covered her mouth. "Oh my God!" Daniel pointed his flashlight deeper inside the panel. Whoever worked on this had no idea what they were doing. Emily felt dizzy. "Can this hurt someone?" Daniel looked directly at her. "Yes." Silence filled the basement. Emily's eyes filled with tears instantly. Daniel continued examining the system carefully. "Your house has electrical leakage everywhere." Emily's voice trembled. "You mean Lily's been exposed to this the whole time?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Possibly for months." Emily leaned against the wall, trying not to collapse. All this time, doctors searched for rare diseases, complicated disorders, impossible diagnoses. But the danger might have been inside her own home the entire time. Daniel grabbed insulated tools quickly. "I'm shutting this section down immediately." Sparks snapped lightly inside the panel as he disconnected damaged circuits. Then he repaired the main grounding connection temporarily. The buzzing sound upstairs suddenly disappeared completely. The entire house became eerily quiet. Daniel exhaled slowly. "There," Emily whispered shakily. "Is it over?" Daniel looked uncertain. "I don't know yet." Then Emily's phone rang suddenly. It was the hospital. Her heart stopped instantly. She answered with trembling hands. "Hello." The nurse sounded shocked. "Mrs. Harper, something strange just happened." Emily gripped the phone tighter. "What happened?" Lily's vitals suddenly improved. Emily nearly dropped the phone. "What do you mean improved?" The nurse sounded confused herself. "Her heart rate stabilized. Muscle response is improving too." Emily looked at Daniel in complete shock. Daniel stood frozen beside the breaker panel. The nurse continued speaking quickly, and her headache suddenly disappeared. Emily's eyes filled with tears instantly. "We're coming right now." She hung up and stared at Daniel speechlessly. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Then Emily whispered, "This can't be real." Daniel closed the electrical panel slowly. "We need to get to the hospital." Rain poured heavily as they drove through town. Emily's hands trembled the entire ride. Her mind raced endlessly. What if this was coincidence? What if the improvement stopped? What if they were wrong? Daniel kept both hands firmly on the steering wheel. But deep down, even he was shaken. Because timing like this didn't happen by accident. 10 minutes after shutting down the damaged wiring, Lily improved. That wasn't normal. That wasn't random. Something connected everything together, and both of them knew it. The moment Emily entered Lily's hospital room, she froze. Lily was sitting upright in bed. Upright, for the first time in weeks. Color had returned faintly to her cheeks, and the terrifying weakness in her eyes looked smaller now. "Mom!" Emily burst into tears instantly. She rushed forward and hugged her daughter tightly. "Oh, my baby!" Lily looked confused by her mother's reaction. "Mom, my arms don't hurt anymore." Emily cried harder. Doctors surrounded the room, studying monitors nervously. One doctor looked completely stunned. She regained grip strength in both hands. Another shook his head repeatedly. That's impossible. Daniel remained near the doorway, quietly, trying not to draw attention. But one neurologist noticed him. Who are you? Emily immediately answered. He fixed our house. The room became silent. The doctor frowned. What? Daniel stepped forward carefully. There's severe electrical leakage throughout the home. Several doctors exchanged skeptical looks instantly. One younger doctor crossed his arms. You think faulty wiring caused neurological collapse? Daniel stayed calm. I think prolonged exposure affected her nervous system. The younger doctor almost laughed. That's highly unlikely. But the older neurologist interrupted quietly. No, not impossible. Everyone looked at him. The older doctor walked toward Daniel slowly. How severe was the grounding failure? Daniel explained the damaged circuits, the burned wiring, the unstable electrical flow, the constant leakage. The neurologist's expression slowly changed. I read about something similar years ago. The younger doctor looked doubtful. That kind of exposure is extremely rare. So, is this case? The older doctor replied sharply. Silence filled the room again. Meanwhile, Lily flexed her fingers repeatedly with amazement. Mom, look. Emily watched her daughter move both hands normally for the first time in weeks. Her knees nearly gave out from relief. Then Lily suddenly looked toward Daniel. You're the mechanic? Daniel nodded awkwardly. Lily smiled weakly. You fixed the buzzing. Daniel stared. What buzzing? The sound in my room. Emily's eyes widened. You heard it too? Lily nodded slowly. All the time. A cold silence spread across the room. Lily continued softly. It got louder at night. Several doctors looked uncomfortable now, because suddenly the story sounded very different. Not mysterious disease, not unexplained syndrome, but environmental poisoning nobody considered. Daniel glanced at the monitors carefully. All stable now. No strange fluctuations. No flickering interference. Then one nurse spoke quietly. Her symptoms started improving almost immediately after you disconnected the house wiring. Nobody argued with that, because it was true, and truth was sitting right in front of them. The next morning, Lily improved even more. She stood beside the hospital bed with assistants. Doctors repeated neurological tests in disbelief. Muscle response returned rapidly. Coordination improved. Headaches vanished completely. One specialist reviewed her medical charts repeatedly. This doesn't make sense. But it did make sense now. They just hadn't looked in the right direction. News about the strange recovery spread quickly through the hospital. Nurses whispered in hallways. Doctors debated possible explanations. Patients overheard pieces of the story. And by afternoon, reporters started arriving outside. Is it true mechanics solved the case? Did electrical exposure nearly kill the girl? Why wasn't this discovered earlier? Hospital staff tried controlling the chaos. But the story exploded anyway, because people loved impossible stories. And this one felt unbelievable. A mechanic succeeding where specialists failed. Meanwhile, Daniel returned quietly to his garage. He wanted no attention, no cameras, no interviews. He simply went back to repairing engines. But customers already waited outside. One elderly man shook Daniel's hand firmly. Heard what you did for that little girl. Daniel looked uncomfortable. I just fixed wiring. No, the man replied softly. You paid attention. That sentence stayed in Daniel's mind, because all his life people underestimated him. Teachers once called him average. Employers called him replaceable. Customers called him just a mechanic. But Daniel knew something most people forgot. Machines tell stories. Patterns matter. Small details matter. And sometimes those small details save lives. Late that evening, Emily visited the garage unexpectedly. Lily sat in the passenger seat, smiling faintly. Daniel looked genuinely shocked seeing her outside the hospital. You shouldn't be out yet. Lily grinned. I begged the doctors. Emily stepped forward emotionally. I don't even know how to thank you. Daniel shook his head immediately. You don't owe me anything. You saved my daughter. Daniel looked down quietly. No, I just found the problem. Emily's voice cracked. That's what saving someone means. Lily suddenly handed Daniel something small, a folded piece of paper. Daniel opened it slowly. Inside was a simple drawing. It showed a mechanic holding a glowing wrench beside a smiling little girl. Above the drawing, Lily had written, "You fix more than wires." Daniel stared silently at the picture. His eyes became watery instantly, because nobody had ever looked at him like that before. Not as a failure, not as just a mechanic, but as someone important, someone who mattered. And for the first time in years, Daniel finally believed it too. 3 days later, the story spread across the entire state. News vans crowded outside St. Mary Medical Center. Headlines exploded online. Mechanic solves medical mystery. Girl recovers after faulty wiring discovered. Doctors miss what one man noticed. People argued endlessly in comment sections. Some called it a miracle. Others called it luck. But inside the hospital, doctors were quietly reviewing every detail of Lily's case. Because deep down, they knew they had overlooked something important. Meanwhile, Daniel tried avoiding attention. But it became impossible. Customers entered the garage just to meet him. Parents asked questions about their own homes. Teachers invited him to schools. Even local electricians started calling him for advice. Daniel hated every second of the spotlight. He preferred engines, quiet work, simple conversations, not cameras, not interviews, not fame. That afternoon, a black sedan parked outside the garage. An elderly man stepped out slowly, holding a leather briefcase. Gray hair, sharp eyes, expensive coat. He walked directly toward Daniel. "You're Daniel Rivera?" Daniel nodded cautiously. "Yes." The man extended his hand. "Arthur Bennett." Daniel shook it politely. "You need your car repaired?" Arthur stared at him carefully. "No." He opened the briefcase slowly. "I came because of your father." Daniel froze instantly. "My father?" Arthur nodded. "I worked with him 20 years ago." Daniel's heartbeat quickened. He barely remembered his father. Miguel Rivera died when Daniel was only 9 years old. All Daniel remembered were faint images, grease-covered hands, a warm laugh, and late nights fixing broken radios at the kitchen table. Arthur looked around the garage, quietly. "You're exactly like him." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" "The way you observe things." Arthur pointed toward an engine Daniel was repairing. "You notice details other people ignore." Daniel felt strangely uncomfortable. "My father was a mechanic too?" Arthur smiled sadly. "No." Daniel blinked. "He was an electrical safety engineer." The words hit Daniel hard. "What?" Arthur slowly removed an old notebook from the briefcase. Worn edges, oil stains, faded handwriting. "I think this belongs to you." Daniel took the notebook carefully. His hands trembled slightly. On the front cover, faded ink read, "Miguel Rivera." Daniel stared silently. Arthur continued speaking softly. "Your father spent years researching hidden electrical hazards." Daniel opened the notebook slowly. Inside were diagrams, voltage calculations, detailed notes about electromagnetic exposure, and dozens of handwritten warnings. One sentence was underlined repeatedly. "People suffer when others stop paying attention to small details." Daniel's chest tightened. Arthur watched him carefully. "Your father believed many unexplained illnesses were connected to environmental electrical problems." Daniel looked up slowly. "That sounds crazy." Arthur nodded. People called him crazy too. Silence filled the garage. Daniel flipped through more pages. Then he found something shocking. A newspaper clipping taped inside the notebook. The headline read, "Engineer warns about dangerous residential wiring." Below the article was a photo of Miguel Rivera. Daniel stared at the face silently. For the first time in years, he saw himself and his father clearly. Same eyes, same expression, same stubborn focus. Arthur spoke quietly again. "Your father died trying to expose a company using unsafe wire materials." Daniel's head snapped upward. "What?" "They buried the story after his death." Daniel's breathing became heavier. "You're saying my father knew about these dangers all along?" Arthur nodded slowly. He dedicated his life to it. Daniel sat down heavily on a nearby stool. Everything suddenly made sense. Why he noticed sounds others ignored. Why patterns mattered so much to him. Why electrical problems fascinated him since childhood. It wasn't random. His father had unknowingly trained him from the very beginning. Arthur pointed toward Lily's drawing hanging beside the toolbox. You saved that girl because you inherited his instincts. Daniel stared at the notebook again. Emotion burned in his chest. All his life, he believed he was ordinary, just another mechanic fixing engines in a tiny garage. But now, he realized something incredible. The skills people mocked were the exact reason Lily survived. That evening, Daniel visited Emily and Lily at their house. Electricians were replacing the dangerous wiring completely. The old burn circuits lay piled outside near the trash bins. Lily sat wrapped in a blanket on the porch, smiling, as workers moved around the house. The moment she saw Daniel, she waved excitedly. Look, they're fixing everything. Daniel smiled faintly. Good. Emily noticed the old notebook in his hands. What's that? Daniel sat quietly for a moment before answering. It belonged to my father. Emily listened carefully as Daniel explained everything. The research, the warnings, the hidden dangers, and how his father spent years trying to protect people. Emily's eyes filled with emotion. That means Lily isn't the first person this could have happened to. Daniel nodded slowly. Probably not. A heavy silence followed, because suddenly the story felt bigger than one family. Much bigger. Lily looked at Daniel curiously. Your dad sounds smart. Daniel smiled sadly. Yeah, you're smart too. Daniel looked away awkwardly, but Lily continued seriously. No, really. Everybody else gave up. Emily lowered her eyes immediately, because Lily was right. The doctors weren't evil. They tried, but they stopped looking outside their usual answers. Daniel didn't, and that changed everything. Later that night, Daniel sat alone inside his garage reading his father's notebook. Page after page described strange cases connected to electrical exposure. Headaches, memory loss, muscle weakness, nerve problems. Symptoms almost identical to Lily's. Then Daniel discovered something chilling near the back of the notebook. A handwritten note. If you're reading this, it means people still aren't paying attention. Daniel's throat tightened. Below the sentence was one final line written in darker ink. One day someone will prove I was right. Daniel slowly closed the notebook, and for the first time in his life, he understood that saving Lily wasn't an accident. It was destiny. 2 months later, Lily Harper walked back into school on her own. No wheelchair, no hospital bracelet, no shaking hands. Students stopped in the hallway staring in disbelief. Teachers smiled emotionally. Some parents even cried, quietly near the entrance, because everyone in Ashbourne knew the story now. The little girl doctors couldn't save, and the mechanic who refused to ignore the small details. Lily smiled nervously as her classmates surrounded her. You look amazing. Are you really okay now? Did that mechanic actually save you? Lily laughed softly for the first time in months. Yeah, she said proudly. He did. Across town, Rivera Auto Repair was packed with customers again. But things felt different now. People no longer saw Daniel as just a mechanic. They looked at him with respect, some even with admiration. Local news stations still requested interviews every week. Daniel refused almost all of them until one particular invitation arrived. A community event honoring Lily's recovery. Emily personally asked him to attend. At first, Daniel said no immediately, but Lily insisted, and somehow nobody could say no to Lily anymore. The school gymnasium filled completely that evening. Families crowded every row. Doctors from St. Mary Medical Center attended quietly near the back. Electricians, teachers, reporters, even city officials showed up. A banner stretched across the stage. Community Night of Gratitude. Daniel almost turned around and left when he saw the crowd. Emily stopped him gently near the entrance. You belong here. Daniel shook his head. I fixed some wiring. Emily looked directly into his eyes. No, You listen when nobody else did. Daniel couldn't answer that, because deep down, he still struggled believing he deserved any praise. The event began with speeches from doctors and local leaders. Most talked about awareness, safety, community support, but the entire room waited for one person, Emily Harper. When she stepped onto the stage, the gym became completely silent. She held a folded paper in trembling hands. For several seconds, she couldn't speak. Emotion overwhelmed her instantly. Then finally she looked toward the audience. 3 months ago, she whispered, I thought my daughter was dying. Silence spread through the room. I sat beside her hospital bed every night waiting for answers. Emily's voice cracked badly, and every day the answers never came. Several people wiped tears from their eyes already. Emily looked toward the doctors respectfully. I know people try to help. The doctors lowered their heads quietly, but eventually people stopped looking. Then Emily turned toward Daniel, sitting uncomfortably near the back wall. But one person didn't. The entire crowd looked at him instantly. Daniel wished the floor would swallow him whole. Emily continued speaking through tears. He didn't care about titles. He didn't care about recognition. Her voice became shakier. He cared about my daughter. Now the room was completely silent except for quiet sniffles. Emily motioned gently toward the stage. Daniel, please come here. Daniel froze. Hundreds of eyes stared at him. Slowly, awkwardly, he stood and walked toward the stage. Every step felt heavier than the last. When he reached the front, Lily suddenly ran onto the stage from backstage, completely healthy, completely full of life. The audience erupted into applause instantly. Some people stood cheering. Others cried openly. Lily walked directly to Daniel and hugged him tightly. You gave me my life back, she whispered. Daniel's composure shattered instantly. Tears filled his eyes before he could stop them. He hugged her carefully while the crowd applauded louder than before. Emily cried openly beside them. Even several doctors wiped their eyes, because everyone understood something important in that moment. Heroes don't always arrive wearing suits. Sometimes they arrive wearing work boots covered in grease. After the applause finally settled, the school principal approached with a small wooden plaque. We'd like to dedicate this to Daniel Rivera. Daniel looked overwhelmed already. The principal smiled warmly. It reads, for reminding us that paying attention can save lives. The audience applauded again. Daniel stared at the plaque silently. Then he looked toward Lily, toward Emily, toward the crowd. And finally he spoke, very softly. My father used to say small details matter. The room became quiet again. Daniel swallowed hard. I didn't understand that growing up. He held the plaque carefully. But now I do. A few tears rolled down his face. And if there's one thing I learned from all this, he paused, it's that nobody should ever be ignored just because they don't have the right title. The entire gym stood up applauding. Not politely, not casually, but emotionally, powerfully, because every person there knew they had witnessed something unforgettable. Later that night, after the crowd left, Daniel returned quietly to his garage. The streets were peaceful again. Rain drizzled softly outside. Inside the garage, he placed his father's notebook inside a glass case mounted on the wall. Below it, he attached a small handwritten sign. It read, Pay attention to small details. Lives depend on it. Daniel stepped back looking at it silently. Then the garage door opened unexpectedly. Lily and Emily stood outside smiling. Lily pointed at the sign proudly. My mom says that should be your slogan. Daniel laughed softly. Maybe. Emily looked around the garage warmly. You know this place changed a lot of lives now. Daniel shook his head gently. No. He looked toward Lily. One life changed everything. Lily smiled brightly. And for the first time in a very long time, Daniel truly felt proud of who he was.